For the bioethics exam, there are 5 prompts. The first one, physician-assisted death. How does James Rachel defend the morality of active euthanasia? In what ways does he think it's like and unlike passive euthanasia? What are some objections to voluntary active euthanasia that Callahan describes? What does Callahan think about self-determination, and how does Callahan and Rachel's respond to each other's arguments? The first distinction is that active euthanasia is the intentional act of causing the patient's death through direct action. The passive euthanasia is withholding or withdrawing medical treatment resulting in a patient dying from their condition. For example, for active euthanasia, giving a steroid injection so that the patient dies maybe because they are in pain. Passive euthanasia is refusing treatment and letting that individual die. James Rachel defends active euthanasia. He says that there is no morally significant difference from killing somebody and letting the person die because of it, as long as it results in the same outcome and is motivated by the same intention, which is most likely relieving suffering. Intention is prioritized over the method, with the goal to relieve pain in both active and passive euthanasia, forwarding the goal alongside the patient consent, leaving no moral preferences above either option. Active euthanasia can be more beneficial than letting the patient suffer, which will result in the timely death because it ends pain and anguish. He looks at a thought experiment, Smith and Jones. Both have an inheritance if child A were to die from drowning. Looking at the active euthanasia, Smith forces the child to drown and he receives the inheritance. For the passive situation, Smith sees child A drowning and does not attempt to help. Both Smith and Jones are fueled by the inheritance, as the motivation in both actions lead to the death of the child from drowning. Next, he takes a look at the similarities and differences. For similarities, both actions are done with the intention to relieve suffering. Both actions result in the death of the patient, and both require medical judgment on the condition and consent from the patient. Looking at differences, active euthanasia requires the doctor's direct action, resulting in the patient's death. Passive euthanasia involves withholding treatment, resulting in the patient dying. Finally, passive euthanasia is seen as the more accepted option, while active euthanasia is looked at as killing and is even restricted in various countries. Callahan has some objections to Rachel's account. He opposes active euthanasia with claims that it leads to dangerous consequences and is a violation to medical ethics. He looks at the slippery slope argument. Legalizing active euthanasia by patient request could lead to more cases of both voluntary and non-voluntary euthanasia. Looking at the penalty is most likely death. Then he took a look at the morality of killing. Killing is significantly worse than letting someone die. Taking a life, even with consent, violates medical ethics by sticking your actions in the way of a naturally caused death, resulting in human-caused death. And then finally, the medicinal purpose. Practitioners' main objective is to preserve life and heal rather than kill or partake in actions that cause patients death. Then we are told to take a look at self-determination in Callahan's account. He argues against this. Self-determination is the principle stating that individuals have the right to make their own choices, similar to autonomy, and it governs their own life, including medical treatment and refusal for procedures. He argues that this principle does not always apply for certain cases, such as the physician taking lethal action that results in the timely death of the patient in active euthanasia. It does not justify the right to be killed, even with consent. Self-determination assumes that life is a private possession. With living, there are other social responsibilities. Partaking in active euthanasia may allocate more burden on the family and grievances and spiteful feelings towards the doctor after learning about the request. Then we are told to look at responses. Rachel's responding to Callahan. How would she respond? She would most likely say, focus on the method of killing overlooks the pure intention that it is beneficial to relieve suffering with patient consent. Even a utilitarianism may say promoting the most happiness outweighs promoting the most harmful action because active euthanasia, it's agreed upon by request through consent and it relieves pain. As the main objection is to relieve suffering, it aligns with the medical goals of creating healthier options for patients, which is not misusing medicinal purposes. And finally, the slippery slope arguments creates an unrealistic example of people asking to be killed when it is not the best option for them. And as mentioned earlier, active euthanasia is also restricted in many countries. How would Callahan respond to Rachel's? He would say the Smith-Jones analogy is poor because Jones does not have any moral obligation for the child. For Smith, if he did not exist, the child would still be alive. It is a bad depiction of patients in severe medical distress because it is a case correlated to crime. Legalized killing through consent cross the ethical boundaries of the right to life, and promoting euthanasia offers an avenue for coercion and malice in the medical space. Patients may be paid or influenced for consent due to various reasons, maybe money, power, influence. Next, abortion. What is JJT's position on abortion? How does she argue for the position and describe Don Marquis' argument that abortion is unethical? What are some potential issues with either view, and how might authors respond to these criticisms? Thompson's position. He or she defends the permissibility of abortion by pointing out that the right to life does not include the use of someone else's body in this situation, the mother. The main argument against abortion is that the fetus has a right to life. She doubles down by accepting this, the idea that the fetus does have a right to life, arguable, but outweighs the use of someone else's body over the fetus's right to life. She uses a violinist experiment to illustrate the issue of dependence. Imagine you wake up to your body tied to an unconscious violinist. It's not even Mozart. You could unplug it any time, but it will kill the violinist. He is dependent on the physical plug connection between you and him. He will fully recover in 9 months, however, if he is connected to you. It is morally permissible to pull the plug even if it results in the death of the violinist. She uses this analogy for the permissibility of abortion. Thompson's argument. Killing and letting die is a clear distinction that challenges the idea that the right to life outweighs the pregnant person's bodily autonomy. It argues that a person must act as a morally decent Samaritan and should not be forced to act as a good Samaritan, which is to keep the fetus. They do not have the obligation to keep the child as a good Samaritan would, but once the mother decides to keep the child, she must act as a morally decent Samaritan to avoid harm. That would be avoidance in smoking or possibly avoidance in drinking, as it may lead to negative harms for the child. Don Marquis argues that abortion is immoral because it deprives the fetus of a deserved future, similar to the one existing humans are entitled to currently, such as myself. I have the right to life. Killing is wrong as it takes away from valuable futures, experience, relationships, and activities. Don Marquis, that's a crispy name. He focuses on the future that the fetus should have and puts that as the main criteria of why abortion is impermissible. Critiques to both. Thompson downplays fetal status and what is included in a right to life, overstates bodily autonomy of the mother, does not draw a clear line with moral decency as a Samaritan. I'll use the pregnant vacation example. She says that it is morally permissible, however, it's morally indecent if a woman decides to terminate her pregnancy 30 weeks in just to take a vacation. She has the right, but it is seen as morally indecent. And the violinist analogy is weak because it does not correlate to the obligation to a dependent child opposed to a random stranger. Pretty straightforward. Don Marquis The future of life idea may not be applicable to the fetus if their status of a person is not stated, if they have the right to life. And it also includes people with significant disadvantages and does not consider the background. It also does not consider restrictions to the mother or the harm from non-termination if it is required. Responses. Thompson, obviously, she would say bodily autonomy outweighs the future of life argument, and the mother has the right to have experiences as well, similar to Don Marquis' idea for the fetus. Don Marquis states that bodily autonomy does not justify killing another person with the right to a future. Next, research ethics. What problem does Hellman and Hellman see with clinical RCTs? Why do you think this problem arises? What is Friedman's explanation for why this problem arises? Explain how Friedman argues for a solution. How does this apply for the care to a patient and their claim to it? How would Friedman and Hellman respond to each other's arguments? RCT stands for randomized clinical trial, and it is the study that is used in medical fields to determine the strength of a certain treatment. Randomization. Key feature. Participants are put into different groups to eliminate bias. For example, Group 1 gets the drug and Group 2 gets the placebo treatment. Placebo treatment is something similar to the drug that has no effect, but it makes you feel that you may receive some effect similar to the drug. And then there's the control group, the group that is used for standard comparison that does not receive the drug. The goal is to determine if the treatment is successful and if it causes better outcomes than the alternatives. Hellman's problem with clinical CRT. Random trials pose an ethical issues when physicians enroll patients in trials with uncertainty about which treatment is better. As this violates the physician's duty to care, doctors are obligated to attempt to provide the best possible treatment, leaving no chance for randomization. Enrolling in RCT undermines the nature of trust-based doctor-patient relationship. Physicians may be incentivized to prioritize research outcomes over the duty to promote patient well-being, acting as a doctor. Why Hellman believes the issue may arise. Ethical issues arise when a physician has the belief that one type of treatment is more superior. Offering even the chance of the inferior treatment violates two principles: non-malfeasance, principle to do no harm. If you know that there's a better alternative, technically the doctor is not following the non-malfeasance principle. And then the beneficence principle, I don't know how to say that, which is the principle to act in the patient's best interest. Again, if there is a better drug, then if you were to follow this principle, they would be obligated to provide that drug or just not take the current one. Friedman argues for the solution. With genuine disagreements in the medical community, RCT is permissible and ethical, even if it is motivated by physician preferences. The key is that no treatment in the trial is known to be inferior by the medical professionals. Duty of care is not violated if trial offers treatment options that are within the standard care, even if the physician has the hunch that a treatment option may be superior. Clinical equipoise respects both patient welfare and research needed to further medical progress. CE states that the medical community is uncertain about which treatment which is available offers a superior solution. Why Friedman believes this issue may arise. He creates a common misconception regarding CE, clinical equipoise. He argues that people often think about individual equipoise, where the individual doctor is uncertain about what is the better treatment. And he introduces the thought of clinical equipoise, where the medical community as a whole is uncertain about which is the better option. The issues arise when looking at the individual doctor instead of the medical community as a whole. And Friedman says that that is the main issue. It should be taken as the community as a whole. A single doctor may offer bias or preferences. Now, there are some implications to both the Friedman and Hellman ideas. Patients are entitled to ethically and scientifically grounded treatment options, and if each patient in RCT receives treatment that's a recognized standard level of care, they are not deprived of either proper treatment. How would they respond to each other's arguments? Friedman responds to Hellman. Without RCT, no clinical trials can be undertaken without a dependence on some level of uncertainty, leading to non-further progress in the medical community. Clinical equipoise avoids harm and allows progress, as long as the entire community has not come to a consensus about what is the worst off treatment, patients can receive this alternative for the trial. Personal biases will not further the progress of medical treatment. If physicians stopped enrolling patients because of a hunch that a better medical procedure was a viable option, trials would be impossible to complete. You can't get research without a control group in the activation group. If nobody's willing to experiment, you can't get any results. Hellman's response to Friedman. Even if the medical community is uncertain about the superior chance for treatment, the individual physician has the moral obligation to act on the best interests. Doctors' roles is not to advocate for the field of medicine, but to act as the personal advocate for their own individual patients. When the physician believes that one form of treatment is more superior, it breaches professional ethics. It's opinionated. So what he's saying. Next is scarce medical resources. The key principles for distributing scarce resources. Number one, equal treatment, lottery. This poses an advantage as it respects everyone's equal claims. It attempts to eliminate bias and is easy to enforce. The disadvantages is that it does not consider the timeline, prognosis, and needs of certain individuals. For the lottery idea, it's the idea that everybody has the same opportunity to get, let's say, a heart transplant. Everybody in need is given a lottery number and a number is drawn and that person receives it. There's no bias and there's no preferences. However, some people may need them more than others. That's the disadvantage that is talked about. Then there's FCFS, first come, first serve. The advantages is that it preserves doctor-patient relationships, provides equal opportunity in theory. However, the disadvantages when you actually think about it is that it is easily corruptible and favors those with more access to time and knowledge. This is the idea that, let's say there's a heart transplant, the first person that goes out of their way to come and get it receives the transplant. And you can see how that may pose some issues as some people may have more time, resources, and of course, maybe a doctor, he may offer the resource up if he were given incentives. Maybe he was given money, he would tell where it would be available. Then there is prioritarianism, which is just priority. And the sickest first principle, and just whoever's the sickest gets priority. The advantage is that it appeals to compassion. It benefits the individuals that are suffering the most. Disadvantages is that it ignores long-term outcomes. And the evaluation is insufficient plus flawed. Then there's the youngest first, which is pretty simple. Just taking the youngest patient first. They feel that the advantages are that it helps those who have the least life, prioritizing the potential of experience. 5-year-old has more experience than the 80-year-old. The disadvantages is that it ignores the prognosis and the viability of the treatment. Maybe a child's receiving this treatment may only extend his life by 2 years, or maybe the treatment might not even work. It unfairly excludes elderly people, as mentioned, and the evaluation is that it is insufficient. Then there is the idea of maximizing total benefits, saving the most lives, utilitarianism. Advantages are that it's straightforward and saves the greatest number. The disadvantages is that it ignores differences between individuals. For example, survival possibility, the quality or length of life. And then a definition or another idea is prognosis. The advantages is that it focuses on the value of saving life, more years lived, and disadvantage is that it is insensitive to distribution. And then there's another idea of promoting and rewarding social usefulness. It looks at instrumental value. This is forward looking. The advantages are that it prioritizes those with value and is key For social functioning, disadvantages is that it is easily abused. Value and usefulness is subjective. Can't really put a value on what is valuable, which someone gives up. Everybody has a different idea of value. And reciprocity, which is backward looking. The advantages are that there's a fair reward to past contribution and motivates donors. And the disadvantages are that it's unclear to measure how to rank contributions. For example, maybe someone donated $10,000 to Goodwill, and then another person donated their organ. It's hard to measure how to rank these people. And then we look at the different systems. There's UNOS, the United Network for Organ Sharing. This combines the principles of seek it first, first come, first serve, prognosis, which is the likelihood of success post-treatment, and it is weighed differently depending on the organ. The advantages are that it is a multi-principle approach. You can weigh different moral values. It is adaptable. The weight can shift depending on what organ is supplied and is needed, and it is widely used. The disadvantages are that it incorporates flawed elements that are prone to bias and manipulation, such as first come, first serve, and it may favor different people coming from prognosis. And sick is first. Looking at quality, which is the quality of adjusted life, it maximizes the total quality of adjusted life years gained after the procedures. And the formula is just the years of life gained over the quality multiplied by the quality of life. Advantages are that it's focused on the meaningful survival. It is efficiency oriented. The direct resources treat those with the most to gain, and there's a standard metric, allowing comparison between different treatments. Disadvantages are that it discriminates against those with a low chance of life year gains. For example, chronically ill. You can't really measure the value of life through this. Although some may argue that that is similar to quality, maybe 3 months, maybe better than 6 years for some people. For example, 6 years of a person with no arms may be worse than 3 months of a basketball player in the NHL finals. Disadvantages are also that it is sensitive to bias, as the quality of life is not measured universally. Again, you can't measure the quality of life off a standard metric. Final system is the complete life system. It saves the most by combining five major principles: youngest first, prognosis, saving most lives, instrumental value, and lottery, and puts priority to younger individuals, 15 to 40 year range, with arguments that they have the most experience. The advantages are that it balances multiple principles, avoids over prioritization of sick or elderly, and still helps avoid wasting resources on those that will not benefit the most. The disadvantages are age bias. It devalues elderly lives, does not factor quality of life years saved, and it is a complex ranking system that is difficult to accurately prioritize. Damn, I need some water. Finally, there's healthcare and responsibility. The justifications for restricting healthcare based on responsibility really fall on two arguments. The backwards looking argument. This holds people responsible for past actions that dictate their current situation. If health issues is self-inflicted, it may be fair to reduce access and require the patient to cover a larger portion of the cost. For example, there's person A that is an alcoholic and he has liver failure because of that. And there's another person that just has liver failure due to defects from birth. It is argued that the person that is an alcoholic has their health issues self-inflicted because of their idea of addiction to alcohol, and the other person should have better access if the resource is scarce because it's a birth defect. And then there's the forward-looking argument. It holds people accountable to improve future outcomes, penalizes people for unhealthy choices that can improve future behaviors, and restrictions may also benefit the natural patients as they are more likely to respond better than patients with self-inflicted illness. So going back to the example, for example, person B, he may be a better responding patient than person A, maybe because of the liver damage from alcohol consumption. Now, looking at common objections, there's a moral objection. We should help people in need regardless of their previous actions, as the situations and circumstances may be different in all cases. Denying care undermines freedom and fairness. Many outcomes are shaped by actions outside of their control as well. Maybe genetics or the circumstance that they were born in. For example, they're born in a family with all alcoholics. Maybe it was around the house a lot and it may be more prevalent than a person living in a standard home. And then there are the practical objections. It judges patients and undermines the trust between the doctors and the patients, and it's hard to determine what caused the illness. CNN, Kaplan, and Norheim also has the objections. They believe in legal egalitarianism. People should be free to choose their way of life. That is libertarian, and people should not suffer due to the consequences outside of their control. Egalitarianism. The circumstances are the dictate that the person is not at fault. The choices is the person's responsibilities. Individuals should be held for the choices, not the consequence of the choice. For example, two smokers decide to smoke and only one gets lung cancer. They both partake in the same action, but only one gets lung cancer. The person with lung cancer should not be punished more than the person that smoked and not give lung that did not give lung cancer. The consequences should not be judged, but rather the choice of smoking in the first place for both smokers. For policy recommendations, they suggest use taxation or risky choices to promote deterrence rather than denying treatment. Maybe if people want to smoke, upcharge the price of cigarettes to dissuade people from partaking in cigarettes. That may lead to addiction. Alhoff also has approach to liver transplants for alcoholics. The medical approach, the likelihood of success he looks at, and through research, after 6 months of research, there's no difference between alcoholics as they have similar rates of success. And then there's a life expectancy. It is lower in alcoholics, but he argues that this could be from a multitude of factors. Maybe their genetics, how they're raised. Can't limit it to alcohol alone as it is not a sufficient reason to exclude them for the transplant of liver off the idea that, hey, they don't gain too much from the liver transplant when compared to a regular person. I need some water. And then there's the moral approach. There's a weak responsibility view, viewing that alcoholics are only responsible for their initial actions and the addiction is out of control. The strong responsibility views that they are not responsible as they did not fully choose to drink. The situation was due to other factors, maybe genetic and social factors. It just absolves them completely of any accountability. And this aligns with legal libertarianism, where people should not be punished by the consequences of their action.